Hello everybody, this is Jason from STEM Nerds. Thanks for being here. In today's video, I wanted to spend some time talking about genetic testing. We're just going to have a conversation here. I don't have a whole bunch of fancy B-roll. This is a really, really important topic because it's happening, and it's happening faster than we could have ever imagined. Back in the late 1990s, there was a movie called Gattaca. If you haven't seen it, highly recommend check it out. But it was supposed to be science fiction. It was about a guy who had a normal birth, but everybody in the society around him, or almost everybody, had some type of genetic enhancement from birth, and he was left at a significant disadvantage. And while in the late 1990s that was completely fictional, we're getting to a point here in the 2020s where that idea is not so far off. And so when it comes to genetic testing, there are many companies out there that can do that. They can look at your genome and they can look at the genes within your genome and determine if there are any abnormalities and if those abnormalities are going to lead to a potential problem later on. Now, it's important to note from the start that this genetic testing is not 100% accurate. And so sometimes you can get information that might be a little bit misleading. Now let's talk about the benefits first of genetic testing. I think the number one benefit is if you have your genome tested. They can do full genome testing. They can look at certain genes that are known to be problematic. But when you do this, you have the ability to visualize whether or not you carry certain genetic mutations that may lead to problems later on. First thing that can happen is you can change your lifestyle. So let's say that you have your genome tested and there is some genetic information that shows that you might be more prone to high blood pressure or high cholesterol is an important one. You could potentially make lifestyle changes that would enhance your ability to get around some of those genetic issues. A really good example is a gene called BRCA, otherwise known as BRCA. And this gene, when it's carried by females, if it's mutated, it can lead to very high rates of breast and ovarian cancer. And so some people have had their genomes tested. If there's a mutation within this gene, they will actually have their breasts and ovaries removed before an opportunity for cancer arises. In the future, of course, the most important hope is that as genetic mutations are identified, that we will have mechanisms to correct those genetic mutations, things like CRISPR-Cas9 systems and restriction modification and gene manipulation. Of course, that all sounds great, but sometimes we overlook the significant and important downsides to genetic testing and getting that genetic information. I think the first thing is we all are aware that our information is not always private. Even when a company claims that the information is private, sometimes that information gets hacked, it gets sold, it gets stolen, and so there's a potential for our genetic information to wind up as part of the public domain. Another thing to consider is what if that genetic information finds its way into the hands of insurance companies? Is it possible that insurance companies in the future could potentially reduce coverage for those people who have known genetic mutations? I know this is going to sound weird, but there's also a social cost to this as well. What if we get to a point like they did in the movie Gattaca, where people really start to look at one another in terms of their genetics? What if, in order to date somebody or in order to marry somebody, you don't only have to give up your information about how much money you make and the jobs that you have and your hobbies and past relationships, but now they also want your genetic information to see whether or not you are genetically fit enough to date and marry long term. Perhaps one of the biggest concerns is what if we get to a point where we can actually construct a genome, or at least augment the genome, change certain genes so that we have what are known as designer babies, and these babies might be stronger, faster, and smarter. Right now, we deal with issues in the economy like income inequality and people having certain advantages over others, but imagine you could create a baby that is going to have an IQ of 130 to 140, is going to be a 6'2" male or whatever you want for a female in terms of their looks, and they're going to be stronger, and they're going to probably be more successful because they are smarter, stronger, faster. And what does that do to people who can't afford to have those genetic alterations from birth? Would this most likely lead to lost job opportunities? Probably. Would this also lead to lost relationship opportunities? Most likely. So where is the line? That's the big question. How far do we want to take this idea of genetic manipulation and changing genomes? I don't know how many people would argue that if we could augment a genome or change a genome from the start so it didn't have that BRCA gene, so it didn't have mutations in a p53 tumor suppressor gene, if we could change those genes so that obvious genetic diseases and later on obvious physical diseases were not going to be as prominent, I think that might benefit everybody, the individual, the healthcare system, and society in general. But what if we wanted to take it a step further? What if parents wanted to create a child that had a certain eye color, hair color, skin color? These things, for the most part, don't usually provide a significant advantage over others, but they tend to be more preferences. Would we draw the line there? Something to consider: what if certain individuals did have the genetic capacity to be really, really, really smart? How does that benefit not just them individually, but society as a whole? Would people who could not afford these alterations still benefit from those who have those alterations and push technology further than we could have ever thought? As a current or prospective parent, how far are you willing to take it? Especially if the people that are being born around the time your children are being born have these potential advantages as well. Something else to consider is we are not just our genetic makeup, and I think science is showing that more and more. And so by focusing on our genetic information, by focusing on the sequence information, we may be overlooking a lot of other things. One of the big things and one of the big concepts is epigenetics, and that is not due to the sequences, the A's, T's, C's, and G's that we find in the genome. It's actually due to the three-dimensional structure of our genetic information inside the nucleus. And what we're finding out is that that structure, the epigenetic structure, can be impacted by environmental parameters, things like diet and stress and lack of sleep, exercise, activity levels. All of these things can have an impact on our epigenetics, and it can be reversible. And so we have to understand that while we have a genome, there is so much more going on that makes us unique individuals as human beings, and it may not always be related to the sequence information that we find in these genomes. And so we have to be fully aware that even though we're focusing on genes and genetic information and genetic mutation, that may not always be the most important factor. And in fact, there are lots and lots of genes that often contribute to a single physical property. And so I just wanted to spend a few minutes and give you something to think about. We're at a point in our existence where we can sequence full genomes, do it relatively cheaply, especially compared to even just the 1990s, gather information that is becoming more and more reliable, although we're not there yet. And now we're starting to get to a point where maybe there's things that we can do about it. If we can change our lifestyle, in the future, maybe we can actually change the genetic mutations that exist. As always, thank you so much for being here, and we will see you next week.